So, I've been playing Mortal Shell, hence the title of the video. And whenever I tell people that, they usually ask, what the hell is that? And hey, why are you in my house? The response I get from the ones that do know about Mortal Shell are a bit more confused. They usually just ask why. Why this middling Souls-like? What does Mortal Shell have that you're not getting from any of the other Souls-likes? And what are you still doing in my house? And I hope to answer at least one of those questions by the end of this video. And you're not finding out how I got into your house. If I'm completely honest, I'm not 100% sure what I got out of Mortal Shell myself, and I'm hoping to answer that by making this video. Mortal Shell is a Souls-like from the year of our Lord, 2020. By Washington-based studio Cold Symmetry. At the time of its release, it was a pretty big fish in a fairly small pond. We were still early on in the trend of Souls-likes. We didn't really see anything past From Software's output other than some 2D titles like Salt and Sanctuary. There wasn't much out there at the time that really felt like a Dark Souls. So when Mortal Shell released, it made some waves, even though it mostly got middling reviews, but it did well enough to warrant a sequel at least, which is slated for a 2026 release date. And I have to admit, the trailer for it goes pretty hard. But was Mortal Shell really good enough to warrant a sequel? I think one of the big things that brought people's eyes to Mortal Shell in the first place is its visual fidelity. It looks really good, and even was outshining FromSoft's output, at least in a straight fidelity level. And even 5 years later, the game looks pretty good. But is that what got me into this game? I'm not typically one to put a lot of weight on graphical fidelity. If that were the case, my channel would be dedicated to Red Dead Redemption 2. Well, let's look at the visual design. It's solid, if a bit uninspired, with a couple of exceptions here and there. Mostly swamps and just dudes in various amounts of armor and undress. Yeah, the environment, it's kind of bland after hanging around in it for a few hours. I think a big problem is it just feels too empty, especially that one dungeon, but we'll get to that later. And the enemy designs are kinda mid. They're mostly just a variation of dude. Big dude, little dude, ranged dude, vampire dude. I really wanted to see some freaks, like in Dark Souls and other Souls-likes, something to shake up the dude quotient. While the bosses have some interesting designs, once again it's just a variation of a dude, with the exception of the final boss. If it's any consolation, the trailer for Mortal Shell 2 looks like they really upped the freak quotient though. But let's move past how the game looks. How does it feel to inhabit one of these Mortal Shells? Well, it feels like a Dark Souls. Right bumper is light attack, right trigger is heavy attack, you have a dodge roll, you have to manage stamina for these actions. Yep, it's the basic Dark Souls formula. What sets Morty apart is that you get to inhabit the titular Mortal Shells. You play as the Foundling. This pasty fella who can pilot the meat suits of fallen knights found throughout the lands of Falgrim. You get 4 flesh mechs to pilot, and a 5th if you purchase the DLC. All the shells have pros and cons, and feel like selecting a loadout for your playthrough. I'd like to compare it to choosing a character in Nightring, but I wouldn't know. Haven't touched it. We've got the balanced one, we got one meant for parries, one that's a tank, one that's speedy, and then the overpowered DLC one. You can upgrade your shells with a good cester, where you can spend tar, which is a currency and experience type, and glimpses, which is another currency and experience type. Glimpses drop like humanities in the first Dark Souls. They stay with the shell that you have currently equipped, even after death, unless you use the Tarnish Mask to return to the cester. Tar is the soul equivalent that gets dropped upon death, and requiring you to do the typical Dark Souls corpse run to retrieve them. But before you even start upgrading your character, you have to spend a little tar to even learn your shell's name. And with each skill you unlock from the cester, you get a little lore drop about each shell. I like these little lore drops. They're really dark and mysterious and poetic.
Fell in with brigands. They mix droplets of tar with muddy spirits.
They don't really tell you much, but it's this distant dark fantasy vibes all around. And once again, it's giving Dark Souls. The upgrades you can unlock can actually be playthrough altering, and they're all unique to each shell, like TL's ability to cause poison clouds on riposte, as well as the ability to regenerate health when poisoned, usually from said poison cloud. I think this is really cool, adding something special to each shell that you can't get from another. But I will say some of the upgrades are much cooler than others. A lot of them are like, you get a buff at low health or low stamina. These upgrades do help each shell feel unique and make it an active choice of which one you're going to be rolling into a dungeon with. With the exception of the DLC shell, he's just overpowered and can use the abilities of all the other shells, making him the greatest hits in one character. And there's also a small selection of weapons. weapons, 4 in total, and once again an extra overpowered DLC weapon. You have 2 big swords, a mace, and then the speedy weapon, each weapon having 2 upgrades you can find, usually in the dungeon they're attached to. These upgrades adding special attacks for your weapon at the cost of the spendable resource resolve that you get from parrying and attacking enemies. These special attacks are typically big AoE attacks or adding elemental damage to your weapon. I didn't get a lot of mileage out of most of the weapons. I went for TL's speedy build with the hammer and chisel, even though I typically prefer a big heavy character in a Soulslike like this. And like I said, the DLC weapon, the Axe Atana, hopefully I said that right, is pretty cool. It's a 2-handed axe or a dual katana, which is pretty sick, and is by far the best weapon in the game. There is also one ranged weapon that you can unlock, the Ballista Zuka, and boy is she beautiful. I sadly didn't use her as much as I wanted to, because I didn't want to waste the bolts. While I like the weapons that are there, I wish there was a little bit more variety. 3 out of 4 of the base weapons are big 2-handed weapons, and then even 2 out of 3 of those are swords. It just feels like it's missing something. But when you get to use these tools at your disposal, it's actually pretty fun, especially once you get into the groove of the gameplay. It plays as you would imagine any other Dark Souls-like, but Morty here takes away your ability to use a shield, and instead, you have the ability to get hard. You can turn your body to stone and block any single attack. You'll have to wait for a short cooldown before you can harden again, or by using today's sponsor, Blue. Yeah, what's up? I was just about to start the ad. What? They're dropping us? It was the joke, wasn't it? God, what am I supposed to do now? Oh yeah, so it's on a cooldown. There's probably a consumable that refills it, or whatever. I don't know. Lastly, you got the parry. You acquire the tarnished seal from this guy. You flash the seal to parry incoming attacks. Successful parry builds up resolve. You can use resolve in counter attacks that can either heal you, turn your enemy into a bomb, or whatever this does. You can spend resolve on your weapon's aforementioned special attacks. And I'll say the usefulness of the special attacks versus the healing parry. The healing parry always comes first, because Mortal Shell doesn't give you a reliable heal like Dark Souls Estus Flasks that recharge upon death or resting at a bonfire, which I'm glad is a standard mechanic at this point for this subgenre, but Mortal Shell didn't get that memo back in 2020. So all you got is your healing parry, or you can forage for the mighty mushroom. You can find these little mushrooms growing around the lands of Fulgrim, which this leads me to the Familiarity system. When you find a new item, you won't know what it does. The way you find out is use it and hope it doesn't do something terrible, like eating one of these random mushrooms. You eat it to see if it's gonna be helpful or not, and oop, it's poison, just like in real life. But the more you use an item, the more familiar you'll get with it. When you max out the familiarity of any item, you tend to get bonus resources, or it'll do something extra for you. Like the poison mushrooms, if you eat enough of them, it'll grant you poison immunity instead of causing damage. The concept is cool, adding a layer of roleplaying to this role-playing game, but it also meant I held a lot of items that I just had no idea what they did. I had all these tokens and scriptures, and I just didn't use them because I didn't know if they would help me beat the game or blow up in my face. There's usually a little bit of flavor text that clues you into what they do, but I'm illiterate. This problem actually gets alleviated a little bit in the DLC, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The game structure is fairly open-ended. You start the tutorial, you crawl your way into Fulgrim, find your first shell, and get told to go find the 3 glands in the land. And you can tackle any one of the 3 dungeons to get the glands in any order you want. And the land of Fulgrim is a green, swampy area, but each of the 3 dungeons all have different themes. We got Spooky Crypt that turns into an Ice Crypt, a Spooky Crypt that's a Fire Crypt, and then this painfully empty, large stone tower that forces you down tight walkways at points with archers. Always fun. Each dungeon has a weapon in its atrium. You walk up to the podium, you have to pick a fight with Hattern to get said weapon. Within the dungeon, you'll find the items to upgrade said weapon. I don't know, I have mixed feelings about how the game does this. I think it's cool that it adds like a reason to explore the dungeon a little bit more, but it can also be easy to miss some of these items. Or if you found a dungeon too hard and wanted to try one of the others, you're leaving with a nerfed weapon, and no way to upgrade it other than brute force your way through the dungeon you were having trouble with in the first place. Or that maybe you stuck with a weapon you don't really like because you fully upgraded it. I don't know, it just feels a little misused or not used to to its fullest potential quite yet. But let's circle back to the Souls-like death mechanic in Mortal Shell. I mentioned earlier that tar is the currency lost upon death, and glimpses stay with the shell that you're currently inhabiting. But when your health hits 0 for the first time, the foundling just gets launched out of the shell, giving you a couple seconds to run back in and have another chance at fighting. If your hit points hit 0 again, it's an actual death, or if the foundling gets hit before he re-enters the shell. Instead of the usual blood stain, you get a copy of the shell that died there. When you return to the shell, it'll refill your health and give you back all your tar, or if it's a different shell than the one that you're currently inhabiting, you will now take possession of that shell instead, also refilling your health. This mechanic is actually pretty cool in concept. If you leave behind a shell that might be better against a boss's second phase, you might want to leave it there for half of the boss fight and run over to it in the second half of the boss fight. But I didn't end up using that at all. I use it more as an extra heal in the middle of a fight than anything else. And lastly, I just have to talk about the difficulty curve of the game, because it's kind of got a reverse curve going on, where the hardest part of the game is the start. The game explains very little. It vaguely gestures in the direction of the Cester, and go grab the 3 inflamed glands in whatever order you feel like, whenever you want. Where are they? Go fuck yourself and explore. And hopefully you'll stumble upon one of the dungeons eventually. The problem is they're all about the same level of difficulty. Since you can tackle any of 3 of them in any order, it kind of feels flat. There's no rise and challenge. It just kind of beats you down at first until you quote-unquote get good, and then the game becomes a breeze. While the bosses were a nice change of pace, none of them were really mind-blowing in any way, or necessarily even that challenging. Especially the final boss, he was just kind of annoying to deal with. I know I've been sounding kind of harsh, but I did really enjoy my time with Mortal Shell. I felt like I entered a sort of flow state after playing it for a little while. You start to learn the enemy's timings and tells, and you just kind of keep up the offensive, you parry, you get your health back, you press on. I felt like in a lot of the encounters I was barely scraping by, which part of it felt fun. I almost hit like a sort of zen while playing, especially once I started to get into the Vicious Cycle DLC. So the Vicious Cycle DLC is a roguelike mode that lets you choose your shell and weapon and go back out to Fulgrim and fight all the same nasties you did before, but in larger quantities and in different placements. There are obelisks dotted around the map that gives you buffs and passive abilities. Enemies drop random scripture items and tokens, letting you play with those a little bit more than I feel like the base game lets you, because they felt like such a finite resource. You gain tar and glimpses from fallen enemies, just like in the main game, but once you die, you lose a percentage of your tar and can spend your tar and glimpses at this thing for upgrades and other things such as the ability to keep more of your tar upon death, which yes, I did max out as soon as possible. As you explore the newly populated Fulgrim, you'll eventually grab one of these 3 tokens that sends you to one of the dungeons, which also has remixed enemy placements. I assume you finish the cycle by beating the boss at the end. I don't know, I actually never finished a run, but I did spend quite a lot of time in this mode, and I think I had the most fun here. After every death I was telling myself one more run, which is the sign a roguelike really got its hooks in you. So if the gameplay interests you at all, I highly recommend the DLC. It might supplant me booting up the main game just to have a single player Souls roguelike. And if you haven't noticed by now, I haven't really mentioned much of the story of Mortal Shell. So what's all the hubbub about? Why are you getting those 3 glands? What's your real goal as the foundling? Well, I honestly don't know. The story is told in cryptic whispers and random etchings in dungeons. Ah yes, the classic Dark Souls storytelling method. You get maybe 2 cutscenes in the game, with some schizophrenic ramblings, item descriptions, torn up notes scattered about, leaving the player to speculate about what's going on with no real concrete answers. This is great for the fans with the right type of autism to make a video essay explaining the entire lore and story, because you're not going to understand it playing the game. And don't worry, some poor soul did make the Mortal Shell lore video. I just didn't watch it. I don't want someone else's writing about something to influence what I'm gonna say about a game, and I just really couldn't be bothered. The little bit of the video I did skim through, it was a lot more conjecture and guessing than even the typical Dark Souls lore YouTuber does. But what I do want to talk about is the game's immaculate vibes. This big, spooky, dark fantasy world with swamps and brigands playing the lute by the fire, it just hits different. Something about it's just inviting to explore. It's foggy swamps, fighting rare big monsters in caves, pathways that lead you to secret endings, and shrines that'll ruin your playthrough. Something about it just makes me want to sit by the campfire with all these bandits and play the lute with them. It just makes me want to chill out here. Well, except for the giant poisonous toads, killer bandits, and whatever a Grisha is. I don't know, something about the world just felt cool. It feels like one of those videos about like the best smoke spots in Dark Souls, but the best smoke spots are most of this game. It's unexplainable, but it's just a vibe, man. Playing your lute in the middle of the swamp, eating mushrooms you picked up. I can't think of anything better than that. Well, should you buy and play Mortal Shell? I don't know, man. How much do you value a cool vibe, a decent aesthetic, with some kind of middling design, with interesting ideas? The game did leave me wanting more, which is a sign it did something right, but the experience I had felt kinda disappointing. I guess you can say the game has good bones, a solid outline that doesn't quite hit the mark. I would recommend the game, however, mostly because it goes on crazy sales all the time. I picked up my copy for $3 with the DLC included. It's an interesting curiosity, often for a bargain price. It'll also get you ready for the upcoming sequel, which looks like my complaints about the variety of weapons and enemies are gonna be addressed. And like I said, that trailer does go really hard, and I'm kind of interested in checking it out in 2026. Thank you for making it to the end of one of my videos. I really appreciate you watching. And if you watched all the way to this part, I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, why not hit like, subscribe, maybe check out some of the other videos. I've been trying to put stuff out a little bit more consistently, and hope I can continue to do so, with no promises of course. But I do hope you'll stick around, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.